Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is joining us. As we're letting people log on, for those of you who are just now getting on, if you'd like to put in the chat where you're logging in from, we'd love to see that. We're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. I see some people from Jacksonville Zoo, San Diego, veterinarian at San Diego Safari Park. I saw somebody who's a volunteer at the Dallas Zoo and also an IEF donor. So great to see everyone this morning. I'm tuning in from Dallas. It's going to be a balmy 110 degrees here today. So I'll be staying close to the air conditioning most of the day. All right, well, it looks like it's 10 o'clock my time. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining in. We'll just be letting people in as they join. But as we go through the day, there's a couple things that we want to ask everybody to do. The presentation is going on. If you have questions, if you can just put those in the chat, we will go through those towards the end. And then also, if you can please mute your microphones during the presentation and turn your cameras off, because if you turn your cameras off, it will help save bandwidth for people who are joining us from around the world, and that will help us on that aspect. And so I guess that part is over, so I can turn it over now to Sarah Conley, who is our conservation coordinator, and I will turn it over to you, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are so honored to have our next guest today. If you've been to our conservation chats before, you know him, but let me do a quick introduction just in case this is your first time. So we are joined by Mike Keigwin. He is the founding trustee of the Uganda Conservation Foundation, working closely with the Uganda Wildlife Authority for the recovery of Queen Elizabeth and Murchison Falls National Parks and to protect the wildlife therein. In 2016, Mike was awarded an MBE, or Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, for his conservation work. IEF has supported UCF for over 10 years, working together to support the construction of 15 ranger stations, land and marine, communication systems, all kinds of important things. This chat will focus on the Scout program and some new initiatives that breaks the cycle of poaching among the youth and provides much needed assistance to rangers. And as we all know, rangers' work is essential and important, and we are excited to have Mike here today and learn more about what we're doing and what he's doing. Welcome,
Hi,
Mike.
all. Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you all, although I see lots of different pictures and names. I'm calling in from a little place in Kampala, Uganda called Bugalobi. I hope there's no power cuts and problems with internet, but let's see how we go.
All right. So if you want, go ahead and share your screen and you can talk to us a little bit. And then after that, we'll open it up to questions. So as he talks, everyone, please put your questions in the chat and we will get going.
Wonderful. So, yeah, as Sarah's very kindly said, I've been here for quite a while, 25 years. My uncle was actually Chief Warden of Murchison Falls National Park, going back into the 1960s when it was in its heyday, a time when Murchison Falls was the most visited park in Africa and had the most animals per square kilometer in Africa, especially the mega herbivores, so your elephants, your hippos, and your buffaloes. And the reason for that is that the habitat is just so lush. There's the seasonality, there's always grass there, there's rainfall twice a year, and obviously the mighty River Nile flows straight through the park, and animals are always as fit as they can be, and they breed at an optimal rate, which in terms of stresses on the animals, there's almost none other than, are they safe? Or is there a potential disease problem or something like that? So yeah, the Murchison Falls is somewhere that I have had a long history with, and it's an area very close to my heart. Obviously, we're also involved in Queen Elizabeth National Park in Kidepo, in the northeast as well. This particular talk focuses on the Murchison Falls National Park and the recovery of it. First of all, in this picture here, you see two young men. They're not actually rangers. These are two youth who, if you go back 5-6 years ago, they were in their family homesteads with almost no education, no hope for a job, and very much heading towards being part of a poaching community. And today, after all these years and the training they've had, they're highly employable, and they are 2 of 20 full-time scouts supporting the rangers in snare removal and other aspects of park management. 2 remarkable kids. They're not kids, they're young adults, but I would employ them every day now. They were unemployable before, now they're very employable. And they're just a great example of what this talk is really about. So the Uganda Conservation Foundation itself is something I set up in 2001. And it wasn't by particular plan. I found a problem when I was actually a Royal Marine officer, and I was deciding to continue with that, but came to Uganda to have a break, saw problems in the parks after all of 30, 40 years of civil unrest and war, and thought, well, some of these things can actually be resolved quite quickly. And I was very shocked to see that what I presumed was a sector that supported the recovery of parks and the professionalism of conservation. There was what I would call a market failure, because nothing was really happening. And the Ugandan Wildlife Authority, who's in charge of the parks and mandated to run the parks, were pretty much left alone and weren't supported, weren't trusted, weren't encouraged by the conservation world. And the parks never really recovered because of it. And I started to do a few things to help, and suddenly found that some of the charities turned to me and said, Mike, this is wonderful, you're doing great work, but what happens if you get run over by a bus? It all finishes. Would you set up an organization that could continue for the future? In my naivety, I did, and it's now one of the greatest burdens of my life, but it's a pleasure as well, in as much as it is all-encompassing. It was not meant to be a career path. That said, it is an absolute pleasure to be here full-time, running it full-time, and 20 years on, working with some of the most remarkable rangers and community people and leaders. We're going through a tough time in Uganda right now, as I'm sure you've seen in the press, some of which is frankly deplorable stuff. But that isn't the everyday Ugandan, that is the leaders being silly. But the Uganda Conservation Foundation is essentially a management structure through which we can raise funds, direct support, and people with like-minded energy and effort who want to get involved in the front line and make sure that projects can be delivered well. And most importantly, the Ugandan Wildlife Authority themselves, the rangers and the wardens, are able to be successful. The limitations that they face every day are removed, and the boys and girls on the front line, whether they're vets or they're law enforcement rangers, working in ecological research, they are able to undertake a professional job, which often they've been unable to do. And providing a confidence around all of that so people continue to stay involved. And today we're running multiple projects along those lines. So for those who are unaware of where Uganda is, the rather beautiful screen on the picture on the left is my daughter reminding me where we are, me. And on the right-hand side, there's the Murchison Falls National Park. As you can see, sort of from Lake Victoria, the source of the River Nile, it moves directly north through Lake Choga and then hangs left as it goes through Murchison Falls National Park and joins the top of Lake Albert, and off it goes through the Sud, through Sudan, and up to the Mediterranean. And so Murchison Falls is about 5,000 square kilometers. A character called Hemingway managed to crash his plane here twice. Not quite sure, it seems a bit silly to do it twice, but he did. Now in 2012, the Ugandan Wildlife Authority encouraged me to resign from my London job. I was at Deloitte as a corporate strategist, just finished helping to manage and put on the London Olympics. And I resigned from Deloitte because 2 of the Ugandan Wildlife Authority people called me and said, please resign, come here, we're in trouble. You may remember that there was a rebel group called the Lord's Resistance Army, a horrible character called Joseph Kony. They had been occupying the region, including Murchison, for decades. And it crippled the park. It made it too dangerous to be in. But at this point, they were out of the park. Unfortunately, during the 30 years of civil unrest, the elephant numbers crashed from 16,000 to a couple of hundred. And the same was true for just about all of the other animal populations. And a lot of the deaths came from a snare, a piece of wire, and another trap called a wheel trap, which I'll show you a bit later on, which is made out of the leaves of the springs of a car. And it's like a bear trap, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. But these are indiscriminate traps that anyone can put anywhere. They might be trying to trap a small antelope, but actually an elephant trunk, an elephant leg, a lion can get in there and it can maim and kill them. The injuries were simply horrific. So in 2012, when I got back to Murchison Falls to sit and design how to recover the park, it was one of the saddest horror stories I'd ever seen. And about a third of the elephants had snares on them in one way or another. Animals needed rescuing probably to the dozen every day, and they're the ones we could see. And we didn't have a veterinary department. We didn't have a working car. We didn't have a dart gun. The vet would sit there crying, because you become a vet to be able to work and look after the welfare of wildlife. And the vets were, all they were seeing was the pain and agony that you can see in this picture. So we sat under a tree, as you do in Africa, and we said, what can we do about it? And we made plans. We decided to, bit by bit, get small grants in from IEF and other small charities, whoever would help us. And we did our best to get areas of control back into the park. But you have to remember that we were dealing with a park that for 40 years, actually 50, had no infrastructure development or operational development at all. It was just there since it was started in the 1950s and 60s. So everything was in the wrong place. An example of this is, if you look on the map on the left-hand side, the little blue dots, I think my cursor's shown, but the little blue dots there are ranger posts as they were in 2012, inherited from 1954. And what you'll notice is they're all around the edge of the park. Now, they were originally built like that for a very good purpose. The threat was the advance of agriculture. The very lush soils, which is of course perfect for agriculture, but the agriculture had pushed out wildlife from everywhere else, and all that was left was this protected area. So they had to put ranger posts to stop any more being taken. And wildlife and tourism was developing so quickly that they put these ranger posts in. Advanced 30, 40 years, the threat changed dramatically. The ivory trade hit, as we were all aware. We lost every single rhino, the northern white rhino, come from here, and every single one of them was killed. But if you can imagine, the poaching groups were able to walk into the park between any one of these ranger posts, and they would be absolutely free to do whatever they wanted to do in the middle of the park, where we did not have a permanent presence of rangers to protect the landscapes and the wildlife within. And it's all well and good to be able to say, we've patrolled an area, but what have you patrolled and for how long? You might have walked through that area, you might have even done a patrol that lasted 2 or 3 days. But for 30 days of the month, you need to be present, because if you're only there for 2 or 3 days, you've got 28 or 27 days you haven't been there. And if the animal's dead, it's dead. So you have to be able to look after the entire park all the time. As a result, we built, with the help of International Elephant Foundation and others, an infrastructure that is aligned to what today's threats are. We've looked at where the animals are distributed seasonally, and how strategically we would be best placed to look after those areas, to reach the most important places, and to block the illegal activities going on in those areas. another thing to consider is that tourism, it was only and is only covering 3% of this park. And if my cursor shows, you'll see here is where tourism is. Well, that means all of this is not economically generative, but that bit is. Now, at the moment, tourism generates about 7% of GDP to the country. It's incredibly important, and it has the potential to double, if not triple. Just imagine if 3% of the park turned to 30% of the park, and lodges and roads and tourists came to see a far greater area. We already have the ability to triple our lion population. We have the ability to move our elephant population. It's already reached a magnificent 3,000 in its recovery, but it could easily go back to 10,000. And the habitat is perfectly capable of taking much more than that. So the most important thing, that the point I'm making here, is that we needed to be distributed to manage this park. And we also needed to be able to make sure those rangers were there permanently, and they were respected in their welfare, where they're living, what they're wearing, their communications, and their operations. So it's what we tend to call the foundations of park management. And this is really what I mean by respecting the frontline rangers. On the left-hand side, in the top left-hand side, you have what was a command center in one of the most famous sectors of one of the top 10 African national parks. And that's what it was for 50 plus years. That's not showing a lot of respect for the brave girls and boys on the front line. Where do they get their water? Where do they look after their dry clothing? When it's raining heavily, of course, the scorpions and the spiders and the snakes also try and find refuge, and they're not necessarily the best bed mates. On the top right is what IEF helped us create, a water source, which is permanent, clean and protected, 8 bedrooms, a food store, radios, a light bulb. They are safe, secure, dry, and above all else, respected. And if we want these boys and girls and women to do the dangerous job they do on the front line, we have to start there. Making sure they're in the right places, but they have what they need to be able to do the jobs that they are perfectly capable of doing, and with high morale. Now, the three little boxes below is really showing you a similar thing. In the south of Murchison, if I go back one slide, if you see in this area here, there were actually, including these 2 dots, there were absolutely no ranger facilities whatsoever. This was a gate, and this was a chimp wrecking area. So no law enforcement anti-poaching within this 3,000 square kilometer area. Now, with the little money we had managed to gather at the beginning, sitting under that acacia tree with various characters, we moved from nothing being there to we found some shipping containers. And Debbie will remember us scrambling around for money just to find any way of making sure rangers could be in the region and could launch their operations from there. And then last year, we renovated the shipping containers again, but we also added a 6-man ranger post. And that means that it's now the command center. It's got a solar power system with the digital radios. It's got the ability to house 10 rangers who can be operational the whole time. But it shows you from nothing to where we are today. And the Marine Rangers capability, if we look at on the western side of here, you'll see Lake Albert. Now, a lot of the poaching comes across on what is pretending to be fishing boats, but they are landing and placing thousands of snares all over this very high density of wildlife landscape. And we've removed 47 metric tons of snares from this area in the last 12 years. I think some may have seen a picture of Snare Mountain. I'll show you it a bit later on. It's been a remarkable effort, but we didn't have a way of trying to block these illegal fishing boats from actually being on the water and landing. So we had to create the Marine Ranger stations, and we had to make sure there were boats on them. This week, sadly, we've had a massive tragedy, and we lost a ranger with an engine accident, burning a boat, and I might talk about that a bit later, but 5 rangers were rescued, and one sadly has died. That is park life, which is no excuse, but there's a lot of tragedy that goes on the front line. So a marine station, again, this is sponsored by IEF, and actually I believe some of the callers on tonight's group are part of the supporters of this particular ranger post. And it's a 6-man ranger post. On the bottom right, it has a converted container where we keep engines, spare parts, fuel, oil, life jackets, that sort of thing. And this means that there's a boat permanently operational on the river and able to block the poachers trying to sneak across, or even trying to sneak their meat or ivory out. And there are 4 ranger posts of that sort of type. In between it all, the Joint Operations Command Center, where this is part of a law enforcement and operations center where all communications from all of the different 9 sectors across the park come back into an operations room. It's rather like a CSI Miami, except none of us are very good looking. And basically, we have an operational software called Earth Ranger, developed by Paul Allen, the late Paul Allen, who through Vulcan, with a lot of national parks, has created this incredible system, which is at the forefront of basically everything technology that's happening in the parks now. And all the digital radios, the smartphones, operations of any department now run through this incredible program, allowing us to communicate with the comms system over 80% of the park, which if you go back 10 years ago, we only had 3% of the park being communicable. So here we have an operations room. Next to it is the intelligence room. And of course, from there, whether you're a tourist who's stuck in the mud, or you've seen a giraffe or an elephant that's in a trap, or you see poachers, or you're a community member who is seeing elephants coming towards their crops, you can call the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and there will be a quick reaction force vehicle as per on the right-hand side, again, IEF supported, and there will be the ability for that car to, not just that car, other cars, to respond as quickly as humanly possible with the resources available. And actually in the back of that car, you can see some poachers are being caught. So within that building, there's also the legal department. So once people have been caught or there's been an arrest of some description, the criminal evidence can be properly processed and securely looked after. The legal department can then take statements, and then within 24 hours, what you can't see in the picture is a little police station to the left of that building, where the police then take over within the Ugandan law within 24 hours, and we start to process the prosecution case and take them to court within 48 hours. So within 50 meters, we simply have everything on site to be able to process the genesis of a patrol or operation or a response, or actually what has happened because of that response. And often, of course, when we're out on a patrol or there's an operation, they're able to coordinate with us. The tragedy that happened in Murchison 6 months ago, where one of our rangers and a patrol was right in the middle of elephants, and sadly one ranger got killed. It happened at night, and we were able to, for the very first time, coordinate a response at night to reach the rest of the rangers and recover the body using this incredible network of Earth Ranger with digital radios and phones. And previously we would have had to have waited for the next day, and likely other people would have also passed away. So it's a capability which is phenomenal. One would expect it to be there in every park, but nothing was here. And it's really changed everybody's lives and professionalism. We also then, again, with IEF support, most things have been with IEF, we created the veterinary unit, the lab, the forensics, the ability for a vehicle. The wonderful Berries got involved with this, and we've been able to save dozens, well, not dozens, hundreds of animals, whether they're the Rothschilds giraffes, the elephants, the lions. They have managed as a department to save well over 1,000 endangered species. And the amount of snares that are still going in, we still have 3 to 4 responses a day. And we've got a young vet who is a UCF young vet who he called me earlier today. He's saved 3 Rothschild's giraffes today. Now we have over 80% of the Rothschild's giraffe in Africa, the whole species, in fact, and they're incredibly important to us, as are the lions and elephants and all animals. But we've managed to get their numbers up through their protection and their rescues from 400 to over 2,000 now. So it's true testament to putting money in the right place. But the brave boys and girls are still facing the everyday threat of snares, and at the bottom of this horrific picture, if you like, is the wheel trap. Wheel trap is effectively an IED. If set and you put your foot in it as a bear trap, essentially, it will take your limb off. And being 100 kilometers from a road, you are more than likely to bleed out. It is a death trap. We have the president recognizing it as dangerous as an AK-47. We've removed over 9,000 from the park, and they are the thing that terrify us. The thing with all of this is a lot of this is made from scrap metal. We can't recycle the snares, so we have to decommission them by burying them under slabs of the foundations of buildings. Now, this happens to be emptying the armory once. We have emptied that armory over 10 times. So this mountain is part of a mountain range. And we have decommissioned hundreds of thousands of these snares. We can't recycle them because they're a mix of different metals, but we can recycle those bear traps, the wheel traps as we call them. The issue with them is I don't want to let them out of my sight until I actually see each one put individually into the smelter. And that's why we haven't recycled the wheel traps as yet. But the picture was taken by a brilliant photographer called Paul Hilton, who's been with Global Conservation, a close partner of IEF, matching a lot of IEF's money and helping us to build ranger posts and do things on top. And that's one of the most important thing that I can bring to the table talking to anyone is that we've all got to work together. We can't work as individuals. We've got to pool funds. We've got to pool efforts. We've got to get you guys to the field. We've got to reach both ways and support you too. But here we have various organizations matching each other's funding for the betterment of the park. And because of that, we've been able to achieve a huge amount. And because of that, one of Africa's lost parks is back into being a top 10 park. And an African government has done that. And it's probably the finest example of recovery in Africa. This is possibly the most boring slide you will ever see. Don't read it. But it gives an idea of one aspect of rebuilding a park from conflict after years of neglect. It's tangible stuff. From a park that had 3% of it being used, and that's what people thought Murchison was, well, actually, we've now divided into 9 sectors. Each sector has its own command center and various ranger posts. It has its own plan. It has to have its own ranger force. It has its own communications and power. It has what it needs to counter its threats. And sometimes that's anti-poaching, but actually a lot of the time, it's also to do with problem animal control and human-wildlife conflict. None of these areas have been opened up, yet animals move everywhere. And if we want to have 300 to 500 lions back in Murchison, we can't just be protecting the 3% of the tourism area. We have to do the nitty-gritty work, the heavy lifting. We need a bridge to put in to access the landscape. We need a ranger post. We need the things that the rangers need on the ground. And behind that comes tourism. And behind that comes the eyes and the ears of people who are excited and love to visit, and they pay for the future of it. And of course, then the communities get the revenue trickling down through the supply chains and the rest of it. It's a boring list, but it gives you an example of just how much work has gone in over the years. Now, this isn't anything to do with operations. This is the hard stuff, building things, providing things, and there's a lot more than this. We were recently asked by the Uganda Wildlife Authority to provide a list of what we've provided for the last 5 years. It's 25 pages long, like this. And that is because of amazing organizations and people like Debbie, who's on this call, and Sarah, who's backed, all of you who've backed us and in the field. And I say us, it's every ranger in the field that you've backed. And the result is, well, we moved 400 Rothschild's giraffes to over 2,000. The Uganda cob and antelope went from 40,000 to over 160,000. Every single animal species is rocketing up, including the elephants. The distribution is going up. The hartebeest is good. The warthogs, even the lions is going up. It's the only place in Uganda where the lion population was not only stable, but recovering in a spectacular way. So much so their home ranges, the area they live in, where they get all of what they need, are tiny. We've got home ranges for lions of 4 to 5 square kilometers. Basically, they're sitting on a rocky outcrop and not moving. They don't need to. Everything they want is just right there. So you can imagine just how many lions and other animals we could have in Murchison if we can pursue what we're doing. The reason why these other lines at the bottom don't look so exciting is the cob line is there, and that's this one here, and that rather shrinks the rest of them. So in some ways, the graph is great. In other ways, it doesn't really give justice to the other animals. But to give you the aerial survey results from 2019, you can see this only gives from 2015 to 19, a small period. It does show quite an increase in many areas over a short period of time. Now, post-COVID, we have had poaching more than we have probably had for the last 20 years. COVID, the communities tried to hold it together, and we tried to hold them together. But it wasn't just COVID. We went through the flooding of the River Nile, which flooded fisheries. That's an economy gone. We then had agriculture flooded. That's another fabric of the economy gone. And of course, tourism, of which 95% of the operational budget of the Uganda Wildlife Authority depends upon, was just disappeared overnight. They had failed crops for 2.5 years. And there comes a time when a household is completely unable to operate. They're subsistence farmers, remember, so they're trying to feed their families with 1/4 of an acre of land, 1/2 an acre of land. It's not even great land, with an extended family at home, and the schools were closed for the longest anywhere in the world. Now that means more mouths to feed, more density of people in the household, more cholera, more typhoid, more malaria. Eventually, after COVID, the will of the communities broke. They were desperate, and they have started poaching. The criminal organized gangs have started to prey on them as a vulnerable group to be able to get hippo teeth, to be able to get lion parts for legal wildlife trade and for the bushmeat trade, which is vast. Now, we're lucky that we've had scouts on the ground supporting the rangers. But something I have to raise here is that we had about 1/5 to 1/4 of the rangers we actually need in the park. We had 139 rangers operating, and that's about, I would say, about 1/4 of what we really need. Now, of the 139, you've got some who are ill, on leave, injured, malaria, going to weddings, whatever. Some have retired, some have died, some are having babies. And then they come from law enforcement departments, they come from research and monitoring, veterinary departments, they even come from intelligence or problem animal control and human wildlife conflict. Now, with 40 ranger posts in the park, protecting the whole landscape, you meant to have a minimum of 2 rangers in a ranger post at any one time, which means if you have that, you've 80 of your 139 rangers who obviously aren't always available because they're manning gates or doing whatever they're doing. You can't operate, you can't patrol, there's no one to be there. And we've had 7 years of this. In the last few weeks, in fact, the Ugandan Wildlife Authority has added another 200 rangers to Murchison Falls, of which 80 are unavailable for law enforcement. So we've moved ourselves up to just over 250 rangers. Still not enough, but for the first time, we've had some new blood, new energy. Now, we have worked with communities for a long time. Whilst we've been protecting the inside of the park and upgrading the inside of the park, our greatest partners are actually the communities outside. If they don't see the value of the park in terms of its of benefit to the region or to them, and especially if they lose value because of crop raiding by elephants eating their crops or lions eating cattle or whatever, they are going to lose interest in the park and maybe encourage themselves to or to support other people in illegal activities. Now, the fact of the matter is the picture on the left is what we had. These are kids. these are under 18s, even under 20s, whatever. We can either go down the route of continually arresting youth with absolutely no life chance, or those same kids on the right, we can get them through vocational colleges and through schools and get them skills and employment and hold problem families together. And they start contributing not only to the park, but also to society and their families in a really positive way. And so we started through COVID and before COVID, in fact, going to problem areas and saying to even poaching groups, one person in the family we will sponsor to go into a vocational college skill, to get a skill, and then we'll get them apprenticeship, and then we'll get them an employment. And we had 100 of them. And it's been a howling success. These kids I would employ any day. In fact, I do. I have a great deal of loyalty and care for them. I will not let them go off track now. They are superb kids. 20 of them are scouts removing snares every single day in the park, in teams of 4, supporting Uganda Wildlife Authority rangers on the front line. And they've received huge training from the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and they are fully accepted. More importantly, what they earn, they're mentored to look after very carefully, not to waste it, but to spend it on their families and on their farms and on their parents and on their siblings, and make sure that as ambassadors of the relationship between the park and the community, they're able to strengthen the value returning back to the community in the region. We already spend 20% of park revenue gate entries with the community all the time. But this program has been extraordinary. And you can see the unarmed boys being scouts. All of these boys and girls are making bricks or whatever courses they've done, from carpentry to bricklaying to mechanics to how to work a chainsaw to keep tracks open, maintain boat engines and how to drive boats. There's a list of skills further down in this presentation that you'll see that we provided. But with 80% of the population under 22 years old, the future is not working with the older generation, it's working with the youth. And getting into the primary schools, getting these kids to appreciate good practices of looking after the soil, looking after trees, looking after the environment they're in, looking after their education, their skill development, and then getting into or through primary school to secondary school and into an employable state. And that has been critical. And families are run by the ladies. Boys, I'm afraid, if you're on this call, we're the naughty ones. We get ourselves into trouble, we get bored, we do things. And a lot of the boys, by the time it comes to 1 o'clock every day, they're looking to get drunk, they're looking to mess around with girls, and they're looking into drugs. They can't afford it, they haven't got any money, they're bored, they can't watch maize grow anymore, that's tedious, they get into trouble, they come poaching. And it's a really bad cycle, and breaking that cycle is critical. But at the household level, it is the ladies of society that look after the youth, that look after the household, the nutrition, the health, the agriculture, the markets, marketing of agricultural products, and even the education. Now, one of the issues there is that the ladies of the communities don't get through school. And I might not be terribly articulate in saying this, but when you hit puberty, the girls do not have pads, sanitary pads. They do not have ablution blocks where they can wash. So the stigma involved in that means they don't go to school, they don't continue. And that is a massive problem within development of communities and household stability here. So one of the projects we're looking at and doing is to take a primary school and a secondary school, put in ablution blocks, put in a borehole, and we get sanitary pads in there. We make sure girls within important parts of the society, especially where there's poaching and unstable communities, are able to go through education and come out the other end of it, and possibly then we can get into scholarships with secondary school and even tertiary school, and we can find them employment. Ultimately, we've got to get the economy of the households in those problem areas stable. And we're the only, not the organization, but we're the only source that it's going to come from in terms of the park. There is no industry around that's otherwise going to do it. So it's absolutely critical to get people jobs, youth active, breaking the cycle between the generations of the old boys who might be poaching and will never stop. They've got nowhere else, nothing else to do, but this new generation to become positive. And the girls to have an opportunity to really do the stabilizing of the society that they are absolutely critical with. Now, in and around those schools, we can, with the borehole, if you've got a borehole there, you can now start with a tree nursery. We've already planted 750,000 trees in households, all indigenous, all for wood, all for medicinal plants, and all for things like avocados. Obviously, you don't put fruiting trees near the elephants, but this is holding the soil conservation together. Is providing products critical for them. And in the schools, they are planting tens of thousands of trees, which is improving the environment and providing nutrition for everybody. And as you're all well aware, avocados are great for you, not just avocados, but there's so many different fruiting trees. And the kids are learning from a very young age about the importance of looking after their environment. So it's also something we're working hard on. My final slide is a sort of list, really, of some of the courses we've held. A lot of the vocational colleges in the region we're in will produce 4 courses. Those courses churn out thousands of people, which flood a market full of people that maybe only there are a few jobs available. And I don't see the point in that. You've got to have a demand to put a job into, a youth member into a job. And that means you probably have to have multiple different courses in different types and keep agile to make sure that you can provide those opportunities. And for some, they're very different. The top right picture is actually the American ambassador, the previous one, Deborah Malik, who is an absolute superstar. She's now retired and gone back to Pennsylvania, I believe, somewhere in the beautiful countryside there. But here she was championing some of the young girls who'd gone through seamstressing and courses, and Deborah was an absolute revelation in enthusiasm and supporting all of the youth, and came up to Murchison at a click of the fingers and just, gave all the energy she could to help us. And the bottom right one is actually a girl group at Patchir College, part of the Pan-African Conservation Education, the PACE program, where they were learning seamstressing. And what they do is to make what we call tsetse fly traps. These are, I think you probably know what I mean by a horse fly. It's a fly that bites you and it hurts. But anyway, they're a real pain. And in the past, they spread trypanosomiasis, sleeping sickness, not a problem now, but was then. But lodges and the parks, especially with rhino introductions and other aspects, they require tsetse fly management. So they create the traps, make them, and the lodges buy them, and now they're employed. And the good thing about that is that's the diversity we're after. So there's a group of sort of 20 of them that are able to manage this little enterprise, and it's more money than they've ever had, and it's a very sustainable little model. We have 100 of these kids in the parks building the range of posts, supporting the rangers, maintaining roads, carrying out the clearance of trees that have been pushed over by elephants, that are famous at doing that, and blocking roads. The 100 kids represent thousands in the communities, but we've proven what can work well. And these ambassadors go back to their communities and they confront the poaching gangs, and they confront the elders and say, actually, all of that rhetoric you told us about years ago is not true. They're trying. They have the ability to help. You need to be positive, and we need to talk, and we need to have opportunities supported. And that is what we're after, that opening to the poaching gangs where we can reform them. And across Murchison and actually Queen Elizabeth National Park, we're having great success with that. It is at a small scale, but you have to start somewhere. At that point, I was told 45 minutes. I think I've done 44. I'm going to hand over to Sarah again, and I'm sure there may be a question or two.
That was incredible, Mike. Thank you. So the youth program, the Scout program, if we don't have these educational opportunities for these kids, what happens? What do they do? I know you said that there's a huge amount of unemployment, but how do they fill their time if they're not educated, if they don't have useful jobs?
That's the crux of it. And like anyone with energy and being young, and they get themselves into trouble. They call the park the World Bank because it's full of stuff that they can transfer into money. If they kill an antelope or kill an animal, or they support a professional poaching group, they get a tiny bit of meat, which they can sell. And they're then tied into the illegal activities and the gangs. And that grows into doing more and more, and being more adventurous, and maybe going into lion poaching or going into elephant poaching, getting a gun. And then it becomes incredibly serious. But that is the problem of these organized criminal gangs, and some very senior people as well, trying to prey on the vulnerable. But ultimately, very sadly, by, as I said, 1 o'clock, a lot of these kids are bored out of their minds and wanting to be drunk, or they're taking drugs, and it literally goes nowhere. And that cycle has to change. We all in our own societies have our own issues, and I don't think they're too far from what I just said there, where things go wrong and people start to get into bad habits and start to try and fuel those bad habits by doing bad things. And it's no different here. We just got to change our society and try and make sure these kids have a future. That's really it.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, by helping these individual youth, you're not just helping them economically and obviously community wise, but you're helping their families, you're helping the community at large, and ultimately you're helping the wildlife at the same time. So it's a holistic approach to conservation just through this community education with these youth.
Yeah, I mean, very, very vulnerable households. They're not necessarily bad people. I mean, I promise you, they're very basic, but they were held through COVID by these kids who every single day earned their $5 and got their food, but they saved and never spent it. We mentored them about financial management. And what's that? Surely I just go and buy a new phone and I buy a new T-shirt and new trainers. They had no idea. But then they went back and looked after the families, looked after the food, the kids, the issues, the school fees, and that they are making that incredible transition to being a household leader, a community leader, and champion. And we didn't have a canvas through which we could say, oh, there's loads of great people like that already. We can link into them. These are they. They are the future. And now we can expand it and get more and more kids through. And we have learned so much from them, let alone what we've taught them. We've maybe arrogantly done lots of stuff, which as organizations was just not right. Maybe we were too hard on some things. Maybe we had to question ourselves and say, what are we actually achieving and how? They've been a huge learning curve for us all. And that's after 25 years of doing this. I'm still learning from them. And they're great kids.
Amazing. Some questions in the chat. People are asking, what would be the life expectancy of people living in Uganda? So these youth outreach, obviously it's not going to be the same as, say, Western countries. So what are we talking about?
Well, it's different, I had a conversation with one of the old boys up in Murchison not very long ago. He's 104. There are others, quite honestly, yes, disease takes people. Typhoid, cholera, malaria a lot, HIV a lot. They usually have, and through COVID, it wasn't because of COVID, it was the secondary issues they had that caused the vulnerability. A lot of people have malnutrition issues too. So I would say between 40 to 50 is probably, quite likely. They have hard lives. But there's such a large number of people, there's always a lot of tragedy. So, the kids everywhere and they don't have all they need. If someone has a tooth problem, an eye problem, well, live with it.
Right.
That's how it is.
That is difficult. And I think that's a way of life that's so different for a lot of people to comprehend. You know, it's so different from how we live. So we have a lot of questions about poaching and the rangers. So you talked about how when poachers are caught and the sort of everything being in one place at the jock and things like that. But when they're caught and prosecuted, what are the penalties? What kind of jail time? What kind of follow through is there?
Well, there's a number of things there. You have to have legal policy to use as your legal arm to prosecute properly. And that means you have to have evidence. And you have to be able to prosecute with evidence. So it depends what they're doing, what they've done, what the evidence is that we've got them on. In 2019, we had the Uganda Wildlife Authority sort of Wildlife Act that was put through as an act of parliament, and that helped us a lot. So there are penalties that have been given for over 10 years. There have been penalties that have been for a few years. There are variances where sometimes we're very disappointed because the judiciary maybe haven't understood the significance or severity of the issue that we're bringing to them. And that's one of the many, many jobs along the law enforcement pathway that we have to engage with and bring the judiciary into the park so they understand the importance of and the challenges faced by rangers in evidence gathering of the actual crimes that are there, so they understand it, and actually of the Wildlife Act. But some of the legal levers we use are outside of the Wildlife Act as well. But yeah, there is a big variety of sentencing. It's very difficult to say because it depends. Have they got a weapon? Have they got ammunition? Did they use it? Did they have? Is there evidence of them using it and killing the actual animal? Is it an unlicensed weapon? Did they resist arrest? Did they have false statements? Are they reoffenders? The list goes on. So it's not an easy one to answer. But what we've had in the past was colossal amounts of loopholes where we were unable to be successful, not only in sentencing, but in the actual prosecution itself. And because we've brought things together and improved the evidence base and improved our ability to put a good case together, as well as the judiciary's understanding of managing all of this, and we've done better. But there is still undoubtedly a long way to go in this discussion in terms of what we need to do.
Absolutely. So more equipped rangers, better equipped rangers means better prosecutions, more successful follow through.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay. Another question. Someone's asking, is there a satellite or remote system to increase monitoring days and time? So I think that might be a good discussion or good way to lead into Earth Ranger or some of the communication systems that you guys have.
Yeah, there's some really wonderful technology developments going on around the world. A lot of it centering around the Earth Ranger systems with the SRI and others. I've seen quite recently there's been some satellite work going on. And yes, satellites integrate in a variety of ways into Earth Ranger. For instance, we have various programs that identify if there is a fire. And a report alert comes up on Earth Ranger to the operations room and it's then recorded. For ecological monitoring, it's very important, but also many fires are lit by poacher groups because after 6 or 7 weeks, the grasses grow short and are nice and lush, attract the animals, and then they poach there. So it does have sort of ramifications, but also a lot of our animals are satellite collared, whether they're elephants, giraffes, lions. We've even we have a lot of backpacks on our vultures, for instance, not only to see where they're going and make sure they're okay, but also they tell us where large carcasses are. And we can then send a quick reaction force vehicle out and say, yes, dead elephant died naturally, or actually it's poaching. So again, all of that is integrated into Earth Ranger. So satellites provide us with an enormous amount, as well as the digital radios. Of course, we can see where our patrols and assets are. We can respond. We can coordinate. It's a different conversation than we've ever had before. But technology is moving quickly. Of course, there are, drones in their basic forms are being used. The reason why I might sound a little bit negative on the drones is we first of all need to have boots and socks on our rangers' raincoats rather than spending tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands. We must make sure they're respected first. But yeah, drones have a very big role in the future, and the machine learning and the AI going on already for things like aerial surveys is very advanced, and we're very much part of that as well. There's various papers we've published on that, so yeah, that's important stuff.
Great. So you did sort of mention a tragic accident that happened this week. Do you want to share a little bit about that, and maybe if there's ways that people, what can we do in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen?
We work on the front line. We don't have what we need, and we put a lot of risk onto our rangers. I've patrolled probably near 100,000 kilometers across Uganda's parks, arrested thousands of people, and been shot at many, many, many times. Tragedy happens. It is why a ranger is so highly regarded and so needed to be supported and must be respected. We had a patrol boat on Monday morning that burst into flames. We assumed that the fuel leaked out of the pipe, which was probably a cracked pipe in the heat and the sunshine, and somehow a spark or a flame managed to get it when no one's quite sure what's happened yet. This was down on the Delta area on a patrol on a boat, 6 of them on the boat in Semanya, a boat that was provided by IEF, a ranger post that was provided in part by IEF, and 2 scouts on board and 4 rangers. They all jumped off the boat, and one person had the life jacket on, and one ranger has died, and the body has now been recovered. Fortunately, a couple of minutes beforehand, an unscheduled tourism boat had passed them and waved at them and shared pleasantries. And as they went on their way just around the corner, suddenly they heard the bang and they saw the black smoke everywhere. They turned around, were on the scene, and could see immediately there were people sinking straight away. And they, not medically trained or anything, with the tourist boat went and grabbed people from below a meter down in the water. They were sinking to the very bottom of the deep Nile. They managed to get 5 of them, who all were full of water in their lungs, and they've managed to keep them. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. This is horrific to hear. And I know that all of these people are
alive,
colleagues and your friends. They're like your family.
Yeah, yeah. And we've lost a few, and they're good people. And they're mums and dads, and they've got kids. And we have very few incredible people, and they are.
And I think that's one of the themes of your talk, is that we can build ranger stations, we can equip these rangers, but there's always so much more work to do, right? We need another boat for these guys. We need to do the maintenance on all of these things that are built, provide new equipment.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. And we do our best with what we've got. These tragedies happen, and young Crispus, our young vet, who's just started out in his veterinary wildlife career, called the day before saying, I've just saved 3 giraffes, a lion, an elephant in one day. And we found the problem area. The kids went out, and not the kids, the rangers and the youth went out and cleared them for snares. The boat was then protecting that area. The next day, the boat's gone, they've gone. And, you know, these are critical things. I mean, this is a fiberglass tub with a 40 horsepower engine in the background, and it's producing 7% of GDP in terms of tourism. This is what they're protecting. It has the ability to double, if not triple, and employ more than the 1 million people it's employing now. And it shouldn't be this difficult to get this sort of support onto the ground. It really shouldn't be. I mean, it's not much money, and you see these vast budgets of these huge organizations, and then I don't know what they do. I'm being a bit too honest now, but for 25 years, I haven't seen anything tangible they've done, and you all know who they are. But this is stuff that is easily rectifiable. And now we've got a crisis, we've got a boat missing as well. So yeah, issues.
Yeah, but I mean, you make a great point, because this, IEF is not a large organization. The small amount of funding that we're able to provide makes a huge difference. And people should realize that their little bits make such a huge difference in Uganda. The dollar goes so much further. The support goes so much further. So when you see these organizations with huge budgets, and you wonder where that effectiveness is, where that impact is, it makes you think. But
I mean, look at those kids. Which one of those scenarios do we want? And that's how easy it is. And to make the difference is that easy as well. Just resourcing.
Yeah. Well, and while you were talking, there were comments in the chat about the importance of including socioeconomic conditions of local communities, as well as conservation actions. And that's exactly what this program is. That's exactly how we're making that sustainable change.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, Sarah, I was an ex-Deloitte corporate strategist, and I look at regional development from an economic point, and the fabrics of society need to be respected, and the supply chains need to be respected, and all the rest of it. And this is what it does, that we're putting good kids into good opportunities to hold all of that together for the future, from which you can grow.
Absolutely. And the more kids we can reach, the more youth we can reach, the better for everyone, because that high tide is going to lift all boats, whether it's the humans in the landscape or the animals, both.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and we are coming up to an hour, and we kind of promised everyone that we'd keep it to about an hour. Do you have anything else that you want to discuss, or anything we haven't covered?
Gosh, I don't think so, other than to everybody who helps IEF, whether in Uganda or anywhere else, wherever your efforts are, a huge thank you. We are supported by IEF in so many ways, and I'm sure others are too. So, I can't thank you all enough, especially through COVID, when all the chips were down, and at times like this, to be able to have a positive call from Sarah and Debbie and others is something special. So thank you all.
Thank you. And from the bottom of all of our hearts and in the chat, everyone is sending you love and support for the great work that everyone is doing on the ground there. And we really appreciate you taking your time and sharing these emotional stories. I know that when you talk to us and tell us these stories, it affects us all day, all week. We think about it, and it only emboldens the support that IEF wants to give to the boots on the ground and to the people of Uganda. So I know if that's impacting us that much, it must be 100 times fold for you. So thank you for sharing these stories.
Well, thank you all.
So let me interrupt here, and I just want to make an announcement that Trisha Berry, who is on our call right now, wants to let you know, Mike, that she's going to buy you a new boat.
That is wonderful. Trisha, you are, I mean, we love Trisha, but this is just so emotional.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Trisha. You are a jewel.
Yeah, sorry, I'm being pathetic. Anyway,
So I'll get with you later, Mike, about that. Trisha and I'll get with you.
wonderful, thank you.
Julie, let me turn it over to you. Thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone for being here.
All right.
If you want to support Mike and the incredible work being done in Uganda, go to IEF's website. Julie has the link in the chat, but I know that we are all touched today by listening to your talk. Thank you so much, Mike.
Wonderful.
Yes, and if
Thanks,
everybody
all.
would like to turn their cameras on and give Mike a round of applause or a virtual hug, we'd love to see everyone. And thank you. We have
Thank
so
you.
many different donors on here. I know we have donors that give in various capacities, and please know that we appreciate each and every one of you and your support. And as Sarah said, you know, it takes a village. So, you know, small donations to the large donations, they're all making a difference. So thank you very much.
All right.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you, Mike.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you, Mike.
We'll
We
see
love
you.
the work you do, Mike,
And the
Thanks, Amy.
passion.
and the passion. You're right. Absolutely.